terrain. A lot of it is just really farmland, and that's what the country living is. You're right next to the farms, which is what we're next to. So that's it, cornfields, but it definitely is a beautiful and peaceful experience. But no matter what stage you are in your life, if this is something that you believe that is, is your next step, specifically if you're tired of experiencing the chaos and congestion of the cities, one of the things that I encourage individuals to do as a licensed realtor is to make sure that you are prepared. And there's a powerful scripture that I want all of you to first turn to. I already gave my about. Well, there's my wife and I. Her background is in architecture and construction management. That's actually what brought an interest into real estate. Coming from a background in finance, I found that the biggest investment that a person will make in their life, but also it separates a lot of ethnicities in terms of the wealth that they accumulate, is through home ownership. It's one of the most difficult things for an individual to acquire, especially depending on your family history. And this is something that I believe, every individual should experience. It may not be possible by yourself, but with a group of individuals, it definitely is something that I have seen has been truly inspirational for a lot of individuals. And even just recently, I had helped a client. They were living here in New York City, and she wanted to get out of the city. She's not Adventist, nothing of that, but she just realized, I can't deal with this chaos. And we were able to get her a home not too far out in the country, but we're actually just right now helping her set up the things, because a lot of times these homes up here, they usually are on oil and things like that. So we're helping her get her systems updated, but she loves it, and every client that I help, I always say, that I'm keeping you in prayer, that God will definitely lead us to the right property. But nonetheless, I always recommend that when you are going through this process, as I've helped countless individuals, that you first prepare. In Proverbs chapter 24, verse 27, if you can see it, please read it with me. What does it say? Prepare your work outside. Get everything ready for yourself in the field, and after that, build your house. Again, as I mentioned, purchasing a home is the costliest investment typically that an individual will ever make. Surpasses college education, surpasses purchasing a car, even the cost of getting married. And a lot of times individuals, because of lack of preparation, they end up usually barely making it, right? Where you look at the average individual that's in retirement, nearly 30 to 40% of what they have is taken away just for their housing expenses alone, right? And a lot of individuals, they have to resort, because they cannot keep up with the mortgage. They have to downsize. They have to let it go. It sometimes ends up in foreclosure, as we saw what happened during the last crash. And so it's important and imperative that every individual prepares, especially financially, for this stage. But even before you put the dollars together to purchase a property, I believe that God has a roadmap that we all can follow in order to one day venture into new territory. So the first question that I have for you, are you prepared? Some of you may already have a home. Congratulations, right? But if you haven't had the opportunity to acquire a property, and if you did already acquire a property, but you know someone that may be interested in acquiring a property, take down notes so that we can also prepare them for this stage. So I first turn to Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. If you look at one specific individual in the Bible by the name of Abram, in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, someone told him to do something. Who is that? The Lord said. It wasn't his friend. It wasn't his family member. It wasn't his wife. It was the Lord that said what? Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Do you know where Abram lived before God told him to leave from that area? Right? And what does anyone also know what that area is also described as? Yeah, Babylon, right? And at that time it was not Babylon, but it was a rich area, very prosperous, and I would call it New York City. Okay, so who would want to leave New York City, right? You look at the number one site Right? As Mayor Adams says, this is the number one place in the world, right? So he says, right? New York City, everything happens here, right? You could get a job so quickly. You could find a place to live so quickly. You can get on the train so easily. You can get on the bus so easily. You can call Uber. You can call Lyft. You can't do any of that up here. When I was up here, I said, "Where's the bus?" The distance for me to drive from our home to all the way to the BJ's, it's about 20 miles. The amount of the distance of that drive alone goes all the way from the tip of Long Island all the way to the entrance of Queens, all the way from the Hamptons, all the way to. That's how long that drive is. You know, I'm exaggerating, but it's definitely a long drive just to get to the basic things that you need. But when you're in the city, you walk right outside. That's what my wife loves. You know, she's half Caribbean, half Asian, right? So she wants the convenience of Caribbean food. She wants to have some of the roti, and then she also wants as on the Asian side, she wants a spring roll. She wants all these things. She's Filipino. But that's the convenience that you get in the city. You don't get it here, and that's what Abram probably experienced and his family. But God said, I want you to leave this area. And if you actually take time to study it a little more, his father, by the name of Terah, it says that they were actually on the commute leaving from the city. But there was this phase where he passed away, and that was right before Genesis 12. And then that's when God says, I want you to now officially leave. But his father was actually on the route or the heading out of the city himself, but they didn't do it. So here comes God, and he tells them, I want you to go. And a lot of times I always tell individuals, before you actually proceed with moving ahead and going here or there, you need to consult with God and find out, is it his time for you to move here or there? You don't want to rely on the conversations that you have with a real estate professional or what you see on TV or what your friends or family says. Oh, you should buy a house. Oh, you should move. No, you need to first listen to God and say, is it the right time? And I'm going to give you a testimony of why it's important that you rely on God especially when you're purchasing a home. But that's the first thing. Ask him, is it your will, God, for me to purchase a property now? And if so, where are you leading me? You understand that God had a specific location where Abram was supposed to go. When they were on the journey with Lot, what happened? Lot saw this land, which was Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said, it looks just like Eden. It says that, right? It literally said that. And Abram could have said, you know what? Forget this land here. Let me go with my nephew or cousin, what they say, Lot, and head into this area. But no, God said, I have an area for you to go, right? And so each location is different. I know some in Adventist, they say, everyone, come on, move on to Tennessee. God may not call every individual to Tennessee. Hey, come on, move over to Georgia, right? Or move all the way to Michigan. God may not call you there. You understand? And a lot of times also, and I realized this once I got into the country, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in the city. And so if everyone leaves the city all at the same time, who's going to help the people in the city, right? So that's why sometimes it may not be just yet that God says, all right, move, because you may have family that still are unconverted that are still in the city that you need to help. Now, it may not be the greatest experience, but there's a specific time that God has set. It says that in the book of Acts that God has set, you know, the bounds and the timing when every individual in existence should be on this earth. So he knows what's best, but are we willing to pray and ask him? 2024 survey found that 73% of people who regularly seek spiritual guidance report feeling more confident and less anxious when making major life decisions. Again, this is from a public study, Pew Research Center, but we all know the power of prayer. And I believe that when it comes to this major decision, you first need to speak with God. That's step number one, okay? Have you prayed yet? And has God told you where you should go and when you should go? Understood? Okay. The next section, we're going to first look in Numbers chapter 13, verse 17 to 20. Everyone knows this. And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up into Negeb and go up into the hill country and see what the land is and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. The reason I use that scripture is because after you pray, it is imperative that you now envision and you actually experience for yourself the terrain that God may want you to go to. And we find that first off with Abram, before Abram even entered into Canaan, we find that the moment that Lot decides, "I'm going to go this area," God says, "I want you to go and look and see to the west and the east what I have in store for you." So he had a chance to actually go and see it firsthand what God was allowing for him to experience, him and his family. And we find with this specific time when the children of Israel exit out of Egypt, he sends out spies. And he wants them to actually experience the land before they enter into the land. But what happens? They came back with a bad report. And guess what? Those that came with a bad report, they missed out on home ownership, right? But who got the opportunity to live in that land? Joshua and Caleb. Who got the best deal, Joshua or Caleb? It was actually Caleb. If you remember, Caleb said, "Hey, this area, I'll go fight them if I get it." You remember that? So he actually got the best deal. But anyway, that's because he had so much courage and confidence. But I always encourage individuals, before you say, "Hey, I want to live here," first come up here and experience this for a week or two. Right? Especially when you're on this high, like, "Oh, country living, country living. Oh, I'm out of the city. I'm leaving tomorrow." And then they're back tomorrow. Because you have to be able to adapt to this area, you know? And I'm not here to get into the politics of things, but certain areas are different, so you have to take the time to study the area and see if it's, something conducive for you and your family, especially when it comes to work. If you find that the line of work that you do is not possible in this specific area, it may not work out unless you are the first to start that, specific industry up here, start a business. But that's one of the reasons why sometimes individuals do not move on, because they cannot find work. If you can't find work, you can't pay the mortgage. So take the time to actually study the education, study the spiritual life in this area, what opportunities exist here before you actually proceed. It says here in a survey, 65% of home buyers said neighborhood quality was one of the top 3 factors influencing their purchase decision. So of course, after you pray and you ask God, where do you want to lead me? Then I would recommend that you take that next step, go with your family, rent a hotel place or book a hotel place, spend the night or two, and actually see if this, because it may just be a difference of a block, but you want to make sure that you're comfortable in that area. It's your paradise, or if it's not your paradise, you want to hope that it can become a paradise instead of some place that you dread. All right? So as we move on, the next... Oh, go ahead, R.
Even if you find an area where your work is conducive, you have to think of the distance in travel, how much gas you're going to put, the wear and tear on your tires, and whether or not you can factor that into you should factor that into your budget.
That is true, especially, depending on the climate. If it snows a lot, you can't have a Prius driving in this terrain. You, you may have to invest in an SUV. But if you're down south, it's a completely different thing. But yeah, all those things you have to take in consideration. All right. So as we're moving along, The next item I want to first turn to scripture again is in Proverbs 24, verses 30 to 34. And it says, I pass by the field of a sluggard. Who's a sluggard? A lazy person. This person doesn't like to do what? They don't like to work. And if you don't work, what happens? What did Paul say? You don't eat, right? It says, so I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense, and behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. Then I saw and considered it. I looked and received instruction. A little what? Sleep. A little what? Slumber. A little what? Folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. Now, one thing I want to share is if you're intending to purchase a property, even if you have all the cash to purchase that property or that land, you're going to need money to continue to fund that project. If you're building that property, or even after you acquire that property, to maintain that property, and if you have a mortgage, to pay it off. Once you own a home, you cannot stop working. Again, it's the most expensive purchase typically you'll ever make. And if you cannot keep up with your payments, the first thing that will happen, as I had she wasn't my client that I helped her purchase a property, but I was helping her to actually sell her property because she did not keep up with her property taxes. And because she didn't keep up with her property taxes, there came a few of these sly individuals to say, hey, I could help you. And then he gave her a loan, charging her 12% interest for $40,000. And over the period, she didn't read the documents. Once they do that, they put a lien on the home. So, that's what happens also when you take out these loans. They was able to get her back on her feet in terms of paying off the property tax. But that amount that she had to pay back was only interest only. So that $40,000 remained there for the entire duration of time. She probably paid close to $100,000 on that, right? So she finally sold the property, but she didn't even net that much, because she didn't really want to sell it, but she had no choice. And that's the whole different story. But the thing is, just sharing that home ownership is not cheap. And I'm not here to bash those that are rent. It's okay to rent for some time. Even if you rent a place in the country, start that way, because it definitely is an expensive thing, but it definitely is a worthwhile thing, I would say. But it costs money to keep the money flowing, okay? So I always encourage individuals, especially before you start on this journey of home ownership, that you have a track record of consistent pay. Okay, so whatever line of work you do, you want to make sure if you're a W-2 worker, you're doing everything possible to not get fired, okay? Unless you get let go, right? But if you get let go, get on your knees and send out those resumes as soon as possible, because lenders are typically looking backwards 2 years, okay? And you have to be in the same line of work for 2 years. If you have a small business, the same thing applies. When you have a business, you cannot write off every single expense because they say, I'm not paying anything in tax. And another thing is, if you have a business and you only have a business alone, you want to make sure you're paying tax, because that hinders the amount you'll receive in Social Security. I went off the tangent. But it's important that as soon as you get paid from your business, you're putting aside at least 25% of that for taxes. Okay, they want to see that you have a net income. You're not writing off everything. So if your business brings in $80,000, I don't want to see on that. They don't want to see on the tax return that you only receive $10,000 in the end. Okay, typically if you have a W-2, you have a job, it's already taken out, and they're comfortable with that. But on top of your job or your business, if you have the opportunity to, find other side hustles that you can do, I encourage that, because it says here in 2024, nearly 80% of first-time home buyers used more than one income source to qualify. Now, it's a plus, if you have an individual that can purchase the property with you. I'm finding that the average buyer right now, 60% of buyers are typically husband and wife. Second in place, guess who it is? It's woman. Woo! And third in place are men, right? But outside of that, we're seeing an uptick in multi generations, where the parent is purchasing with the son or the daughter, because they're thinking long term. I know my parents. They may eventually need to move in with me. Let's purchase a property now. And that's a perfect exit strategy from if you're heading to retirement. A lot of individuals are doing that instead of having to deal with the burden of the property themselves. But we're seeing that, and you have the ability typically with most lenders to go up to about 4 individuals on that loan. So put aside the pride and work together in purchasing that property. Once you have that property, you can always take your name off. You can use the what you had, the time that you own that home to show proof that you are responsible on your own. If you have to purchase another property, you could also take the equity from the property. There's a lot of things you can do, but you need the money to do it. Okay. So don't be lazy. Don't sit back, especially right now. If you intend to find a property, make the effort. If you're working right now, see if you can get a promotion. If you can get a raise, every dollar helps. Okay. Any questions, or we can move on? Let's move on. Scripture now is from Romans chapter 13, verse 8. We all know it. What does it say? Oh, what? No one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. When it comes to purchasing a property, guess what? That's typically the largest debt that a person will accrue. Do we ever intend for individuals to continue paying off that mortgage just over 30 years? The average individual has a 30-year mortgage. Do you think banks want you to pay the mortgage over a 30-year period, or they want you to pay it off in an earlier time period? As long as possible, right? but there's a reason why it says, oh, no one anything, because there's always strings attached. If they didn't have that interest attached to it, you could pay that for the rest of your life. But because the interest is attached to that loan, if you pass 30 years, you can't even pass 30 years. Now they have mortgages that go up to 40 years. But it's impossible for individuals to even do 30 years now. So nonetheless, what I would say is before we even get to the mortgage, you have to look at the smaller debts, unsecured debts that you may have accrued over time, such as credit cards, auto loans, right? The average individual has a car loan, which is about $500 a month, right? Average credit card balance is around $6,000 to $10,000. So all of those monthly payments that you're making reduce the amount that you'll qualify for when you purchase a property. And so that's why it's always recommended before you start the journey of purchasing a property, you eliminate all of the other debts as soon as possible, right? I wouldn't even keep any credit cards open when you start the journey. Some do, but it makes no sense at all, because even if your payment is just $100 a month, they minus that from your income. So let's say, for example, you earn $50,000 a year. That comes out to, let's just do the math. You can do 5,000 divided by 12. Who has the math? 5,000 divided by 12. That's about 4,000 something. What is it? No, you forgot a zero then. 4,000. 50,000 divided by 12. 4,166. Okay. So what the mortgage companies do, they cut that in half. So that now becomes about 2,000 something, right? And then from that, every loan payment that you're making, let's say you have a car loan, $500, they'll take 2,000 minus 500. So now you only have 1,500. So when you're searching online and you see the mortgage calculators and it says the amount monthly is going to be $3,000 a month, but when you do your income, you'll see, it's a lot lower. So that's why sometimes if you've ever applied before, you got a pre-approved, you said, I can't buy a house with this. because they take all of these things in consideration, and the biggest thing that impacts individuals is having debt. All right. So I encourage you, especially if you have any debts that are in collections. That's a big thing. That's a big no-no. You want to make sure you get that taken care. And one of the ways that you can do that is contact the creditor and ask, can we settle the debt? Typically, you can pay off half the amount, and they'll clear it from your credit report. Any current debts that you have, you want to try to keep that under the credit limit. Let's just say it's $1,000. You want to keep the balance below 10%. So that means that it has to be at $100. You've heard 30% as your credit utilization, but actually you want to keep it at 10% or below. Okay? You had a question? Hmm. Correct. 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 And that's just unsecured debt, right? Credit cards, all the auto loans. But there's another aspect of it, and which is tax debt, right? I had a client. We just purchased a property, and they pulled on his title all of the taxes that he may have owed, and it said that he owed about $200,000 in tax. All right. And I said, oh no, they're not going to be able to purchase this property. I got on my knees. I pray for my clients. And I got on my knees. And then the exact next day I contacted, I said, he was excited though. I said, why is he excited on the phone? And I said, did you see the title report? It said that you owe $200,000. And he said, oh, that wasn't me. I just came to America from Jamaica. That is not me. He said, my wife was vexed. She cleared it out, right? I can't do the accent, but I said, okay. Because he came from Jamaica just a few years ago, but this tax debt is said 10 years ago. So I said, praise the Lord. I said, I was praying for you. Like Darius, King Darius for Daniel, right? That was it, right? And that cleared up. But yeah, if you owe taxes as well, and that's why I said, especially if you have a business, make sure you're already putting aside 25% automatically, because if you have taxes building up, that's not going to look good. Okay, but the lower amount of credit inquiries that you have and accounts that you have open, it increases your credit score. And it says here 78.9% of new U.S. mortgage loans were granted to super prime borrowers credit scores over 720, while only 4.7% went to subprime borrowers, which are typically below 620, right? So it definitely is in favor. Homeownership is typically in favor of those that can show themselves responsible, right, with what they have. So as it shows there in the last image, make an effort, right? God showed you the location. You're consistently working at your job. You've checked out the terrain of where you want to be. And it's important that you, again, check out the terrain, because you can put that on a board and say, hey, I want to live here, God. You're praying every single day and night, but also put on the board the debt that you have and work on a plan of eliminating all of that debt, okay? Now, one of the largest debts that we're finding for the millennial generation are student loans. There's nothing we can really do about that. And you see what's happening right now with the government. It's uncertain what individuals will do. However, I would say if you have any student loans, start making payments if you are responsible to make that payment and it's not in deferment anymore, because that's going to have a problem. You're going to be in trouble, okay? So that's what I encourage that you do to improve your credit history, so that you look good in the eyes of those that you may ask to receive additional debt from, right? But hopefully, and that's what we're going to discuss later, that you can pay it off instead of keeping it on for 30 years. Let's move on. In Proverbs 6, verse 6 to 9, it says, go to the what? And, O sluggard. Who's a sluggard? A lazy person, right? Consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? Right after the Great Depression, the president realized that because individuals ended up bankrupt, the entire American society and those that lived in it, they suffered financially. A big contributor to that was because they did not put anything aside. And that's what actually enacted the Social Security in place. And that allowed that every individual would be guaranteed to remain at some form of social status. They would be secure in their social status even after retirement. So that's why every time you get paid, automatically, even if you don't contribute to your retirement account, there's a portion that goes out for Social Security. But I don't encourage individuals to stop there. You want to make sure that just like the ants, they're preparing long term. If you want to purchase a property, you need to prepare yourself, and no one should tell you to start saving money. Right? Mom and dad may have told you when you were younger, it's time to save some money, right? Don't spend all that paycheck. You probably just remember saying, return your tithe and offering, right? That's it. But return your tithe and offering, and also put aside a few dollars in that piggy bank. And that's important because when it comes to purchasing a property, they typically want to see that you also can contribute along with what they will contribute, okay? So it's recommended that you put aside at least 3 to 20% when it comes to purchasing that property. Every state, the price point is different. So in for example, New York, up in this area, the average property is probably going to be around 200,000. So what is 3% of that? That's only $6,000. Yeah, five. No, I'm serious. I helped a client actually buy it. She lived all the way in Texas. She said, I'm tired of Texas, right? She said, I want to buy a house up here in Rochester. We got her out of the house like around 180,000. And it's a beautiful home. Yes. Yeah. 4-bed. It's beautiful. I'll show you a picture after. But yeah, but I'm not saying everyone needs to go to Rochester, but there's Syracuse, there are all these areas up here. But yeah, 3 to 20%. If you can go up to 20%, then it removes what we call private mortgage insurance, okay? But let's say you're trying to acquire land. You just want to buy land outright. Sometimes they say you have to put down 20%. If you currently own a home and you want to buy another one, you'll have to put 20% down. Yes, right? If you're currently listed on as the primary resident of that home and you're not intending to transition over to that other property, they're going to require 20% because they call that a second home or a vacation, okay? You had a question.
In terms of, okay, I was just saying, based on the scripture reading, "Oh, no man anything," and one of the pointers I've heard as we discuss this among young people is that how is it that you are going to purchase a home, which is one of the largest that you said, and at the point when we can't buy or sell, how would you factor that in? Because definitely we will not have jobs at that time.
That's true. All I can say is just take it day by day. But as far as when you look at the average individual, they do not have the entire savings to purchase a property. They don't have all the capital. Even clients that I deal with, I have a client right now, he wants to purchase a property right around $2 million. He has over $1 million cash, right? But he's not putting all that cash down. He's only putting about 20% of that, which is about 400,000. Like, why not put more, right? And there's reasons behind that, and the simple term is opportunity cost. What other opportunities are available? If I were to take that money and deposit all into this specific opportunity, what other opportunities am I missing at the same time, right? So right now, the current interest rates that we see today are around 6 to 7%. So it's highly encouraged to put as much money down as possible because the amount of money that they are collecting is ridiculous, right? But when the interest rates were on 2 to 3%, you had a little time, I would say. So, oh no man, anything. I would say that is a progressive statement that as time progresses, you should have a goal in mind of eventually owing a no one anything, right? But for an individual to not have any type of debt, I think it's impossible in today's economy and society. But
But I think the system is just rigged to keep us enslaved, right? And so there, but we can't forget. Just take how Jacob handled when he ran away from Esau, how he handled his life. Okay, he went and he worked, right? I think sometimes we want to, and I'm not going against what you're saying, but I think sometimes we want to bite off a little bit more than we could chew. And therefore, we get ourselves into these $1 million properties that we know they're going to fail. I, for one, I had like 4 properties and I had to get rid of them. Yeah, I have one property now, which I owe free and clear, except for the taxes that come. Except for the taxes that come. So when Jacob went and he worked, and that's what we have to do. We got to stay with her. I would advise anyone who wants to come up in this part of the world is to buy, the land is cheap. Get a trailer and pull it on the thing. Keep the wheels on the trailer so you don't have to pay taxes. I think that's still law, right? Because God is in charge, right? And he's going to bring you through, right? But not without going to the ant, thou slugger, and consider her ways and be wise.
And one point I'll add to that, because you brought up Jacob Esau, if you read the book of Leviticus, you will find out that God has specific laws and guidelines for individuals that were considered servants. And what happened typically in the 50th year? You were free. So we understood individuals were dealing with debt, and that was typically their life. They had to be a servant to clear off their debt, right? They had to serve, right? Today we do that through a job, right? but the thing is, but some individuals, they don't have any debt, so they're free and clear. But this is something that I believe will occur throughout most individuals' life, and the biggest right now for our millennial generation is student loans. Now, I already say, and that's even with that, you don't need to go to that fancy university, right? Start off with the city school, CUNY schools or things like SUNY, community college, right?
Just to add to what he said, it's about living within your means.
Exactly.
And also, if you go that route, to actually try to pay more than what is required, so you don't end up paying for the rest of your life.
Correct.
And as a matter of fact, so there are what we call debt for consumption and for investment. So that means if I buy a house, I put 20%. I can, if I don't expect the housing market to go down, so I still can say I don't owe nobody nothing. Because if I expect that the value of my property is going to go up, and then so I will still be able to sell that property and pay anything else I owe, and most likely I will have something left. So, and then even for school debt, so it will depend. What are you going to study? So if you are going to waste your time study something and then you don't know what you are going to do with it. So let's say, okay, someone say, okay, I have the capacity, I'm young, I'm going to study to become a medical doctor. I will borrow $400,000 to pay for it. But I will say, okay, if you can, go ahead. Because I have someone that I know, a client of myself. So she went, she borrowed money. She went to med school, and then after she started working, in less than 5 years, she paid the $400,000. Yeah, because she was able to make more than 200,000 a year. So that means if you are going to study soft and then you don't know what you are going to do with it, so that's the problem.
I agree. Last point.
Yes. She wants to
Let's try to cut down
Um,
time because I know the time.
Okay, so in light of what our brother over there was saying, um, looking from the perspective of the closeness of Christ's return, and the fact that we won't be able to buy or sell except we take the mark of the beast, I'm wondering if we should be taking out mortgages.
Again, that's why I said I didn't emphasize it began in the beginning. Not everyone needs to purchase. You know, some it may be to rent, and that's why they can't bash individuals. And if it's that, it may be best for you to rent, move up in the country and just rent. You do that. But either way, even if you're renting, you're still paying something every single month. That's going out of your pocket. You might as well own something out of it. I say that, right? Now,
Rent somewhere, right? And you know, if you were to purchase a property, you're able to build equity, but constantly paying rent every month until Christ returns, or until you know we're not able to do that. You're not gaining any equity, but at the same time, you're not able to. Not every landlord is going to grant you the privilege to be able to farm on that property to grow your own crops and stuff. So that's some things we could take into consideration.
you know,
So if anyone have any advice in regards to that, I don't know.
I'll take the last one.
I wanted to say something. So I know a pastor in the state of Maine, Adventist pastor. So I think he built himself a yurt on his dad's property, I think, like big property, and he dug himself the well and everything. It cost him a total of $10,000. $10,000 US. So, and he has 4 children. Is living like a king. So
Now, this is the reason why it's encouraged, if possible, to when you're purchasing, not to mixed investment slash lifestyle. You know, because some individuals just purchase a home for the sake of lifestyle is not an investment typically. Because the thing you have to take in consideration is if your interest is high, your interest rate is high, the monthly payment, let's just say it's $4,000 a month. That's $48,000 over the year. Let's say the home costs $500,000. 48,000 over 10 years, you'd have still paid the entire cost of the home, but you're still paying it over 30 years. So it's not really an investment. It truly only becomes an investment if you have, let's say, an investment property, like a multifamily and things like that. So that's why when you're purchasing a single family, you don't need to buy the biggest property. Get something practical and modest, pay it off, you know, and there are strategies to pay it off in 7 years. Okay, which I'll discuss with you, but go ahead.
A country home being an investment. Is it possible to have another unit on the property, a cabin or something that you could rent out? Like, have you seen examples of that where a country home on lots of acres can still be an investment for the owner?
Yeah, great point. It depends on the town that you purchase that property because they have laws in place, zoning laws of what you can do. A lot of this terrain here, which is rural land, which is typically zoned for agricultural use, you could have it for your farm business or things like that. But if you're doing anything that's commercial, right, it's different. And they've changed a lot of the laws which are limiting the ability to do things like that. But it depends on the town, you know. So you have to communicate with the town and ask them those questions. What can I do here in this area? Because I have a client right now, she wants to build a holistic practice, wanted to buy land, but I had to call every single town and say, can we do this here? No, 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 no. So you just got to do it underground in the basement. Don't tell anyone.
When we're buying property, we really have to look at the structures. So you're looking, if you want to do something like that, if there's an additional structure already on that property, you want to find property that has water running through it. You want to make sure that the elevation is another issue. So there's a lot of things that go into um, that zoning issue. If you want to do something on the property, make sure you have, if you know you're going to be doing big farming, make sure it has a barn, right? Make sure it has even a shed. Because if you don't have a shed where you're going to store your lawnmower and all these things, right? And when you consider snow.
That's another thing. And he mentioned, just get land and put an RV there. And we'll discuss that later on. But you want to hope that there's some form of utilities nearby. Like this example has electricity running nearby. Some individuals, they buy land, it has no value. You can't drill below to connect with the water. There's no utility lines, and that becomes very costly, okay? So that's what we call unimproved land versus improved land. But anyway, let's continue, and then we'll ask the questions at the end. Okay. So you've saved up. Hey, if you can save up 100% of the amount, and that's what I find a lot of times when individuals pool their money together, they can save up 100% of the property, but you have to then work out who's going to live in the property, right? and do those things with an attorney. But the next scripture is Luke chapter 14, verse 28 to 30. It says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first, what? Sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it. Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.'" So we were just talking about it, of how to make sure that you have the funding, and if not, try to stay within your means, right? Just because you look at HGTV and you see all these illustrious homes, it doesn't mean that that may be what you need at this time, because those are very costly. So again, like I said, a lot of individuals usually do not have the funding out of their own pocket, so they usually have to resort to lenders to get funding. And it's not the bank that has the funding, just for you to understand. It's a pool of investors that are using the bank to gain access to their customers. That's where you hear Fannie Mae, Freddie, right? They are the ones which are a pool of investors that have the funding, and that's why there's certain requirements. It's really to have those requirements, right? And so they have those requirements. The bank, they follow those requirements, and then you speak with them. And there are different programs that are out there, but you need to have that conversation. If you know that you don't have 100% of the funding to purchase that property outright, then yes, you may have to resort to getting a loan. And there are several different programs that are out there. Most common, as everyone knows, are conventional loans, which typically start around 3% down. You have USDA loans, which are commonly used for rural areas, right? And those sometimes they have, depending on your income, you could put 0% down and purchase the property. But not every deal that you see is best, because if you put 0% down, you have no equity in the property, okay? So if you try to sell it, you're getting nothing back. Other programs are FHA and VA, which you may have heard of. And those usually, FHA is if you have a credit score under 620. VA loans are those that have worked in the military. But there are a lot of grants that are available out there, and they do give assistance. I had a client just 2 hours ago. He just got approved for us to get him a property, and the city is going to give him $86,000 down payment assistance. It's not so much of a grant, because there's grant, there's loan, but it's a form of a grant because he doesn't have to pay it back as long as he remains there for 10, 15 years. All right. So hopefully where you plan to live, you stay there, okay? You give, yes, you would have to give back whatever they gave you. It would just be reduced from whatever you receive as your net proceeds. So hopefully, I always say you want to remain in a home at least 5 years minimum. That's the only way that it's going to build enough equity, and then from there you can sell. Um, and if you sell it, you pay off the mortgage company and you move on your way. But you said you didn't understand? Yes, you would make a profit. So that's the net proceeds. So let's say the home is 200,000, worth 200,000. You had a mortgage that was 150,000. So that's $50,000 net proceeds. Okay. There's going to be these other expenses though, so it's going to be a lot lower. So you should receive that 50,000. But if you have that assistance by the government, they're going to, let's say you had purchased a property, they gave you 30,000. You'd have to deduct from that 50,000, 30,000 of that, so you would only get the 20,000. Does that make sense? They just want to get back what they gave you, and that's why they encourage. But the reason why they're giving that funding is because they want individuals to remain in that area and help boost the economy. It's the same reason why, with depending on the line of work that you do, they'll sometimes allow for your loans to be forgiven, right? Because you have to just remain in that area or that line of work, right, for those amount of years, and they'll clear the remaining balance as long as you stay there because you help boost the economy. Okay. No, there are different grants in every single state and also depending on the county. Every county is typically usually going to have their own form of grants. But yes, on the state level, you go by the state, type in the state, and see what grants are out there. But I find that usually it is feasible for individuals that are under or around it has to be at least under 120% of the average household income in that area. So if you make too much, you may not qualify for a grant. You should have the money yourself, okay, saved up. But for those that are not able to earn as much, there's incentives that they're providing individuals. But when you're speaking with these lenders, you want to compare the rates of each different lender. And one other option I would say, but this is typically common with land purchases, is seller financing. So you can go directly to the seller and say, this land is probably worth, let's say, $40,000. Instead of going to the bank, let's make an agreement right now. What's your interest rate that you would charge me? And I'll pay you back over the course of time. Okay? Usually don't find that for homes in today's time. It's a larger investment and collateral, so they won't do that. But there are also private loans available. Those are specifically best for those that are doing fix and flips. You get those private hard money loans. But as studies said, it said nearly 70% of home buyers in 2024 compared multiple lenders before choosing a mortgage. But again, as my sister mentioned, you may not want to get into debt. If you have the ability to purchase it outright, go straight ahead. Okay. Again, when the time comes when we can't buy and sell, everyone is going to be impacted. But hopefully, yes, you can be out of the city at that time, but you may lose your home, but you may just lose where you live, even if you're renting. You can't do anything about it, but God will take us through when that time does come. So just focus on today. As Jesus said, let tomorrow focus on, deal with tomorrow, right? So that's what is important for all of you to know when it comes to financing. We're coming close to the end. Proverbs 19, verse 2, it's the end. Without knowledge is not good, and whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way. So once you've got the funding underway, you decided on the bank that you're going to use, now you can go out and actually search for the property. A lot of times individuals go out, view properties, but they do not first know how much they even qualify or they have, the funding. But even after they go and view the property, there are those that take the time and actually study the neighborhood, look at the structure of the home, make sure that it's, well suited for their needs, and also the environment, right? These things are very important. That's why you would need an inspector, very important. They'll have appraisers that will come by and view the home, and attorneys to make sure that what you are getting is not going to cause problems in the future. But for those that rush through the entire process, it can backfire. And this is what I'm going to share, which is really difficult for me to bear. Before I got into the field of real estate, my aunt, she had a plan. I want to, purchase a property. So she purchased a property in Pennsylvania. And it's very important, again, you understand the history and the environment of every single location. She said, I'm going to go purchase a property in Pennsylvania. The first deal that she put an offer on, she got accepted. She went through the whole 9 yards, got the inspection done, did this and that, but the deal fell through. So she found another property, and as soon as she found the property, she didn't even take a look at the area. She just put in the offer. The offer got accepted. She skipped the inspection, right? And when she did one particular inspection, it was done at the wrong time of the year, so it didn't reveal this one thing that unfortunately led to her passing. Yes. No. Radon. Radon is the second cause of lung cancer. She passed from lung cancer. I had to sell her property, and after she passed, and her property, the new buyers, they did the inspection, and the radon levels were out of the roof. The only test that she did a radon test, but it was only during the summer months where radon doesn't really reveal itself. It's usually in the winter months. That's what I encourage you to do 2 readings. But if she did the inspection, that would have revealed it itself. And because she didn't take the time, she was quick in making that decision, even though my father and the siblings said, don't rush, take your time. She got the lung cancer. She only had the home for 2.5 years and literally passed just the end of 2023. She got in about 2021, and that's the height everyone was trying to just put in offers and buy a house during COVID time because the interest rates were 2 to 3%. So she said, I'm buying a house. Like, take your time, right? And Pennsylvania actually is known to have the highest amounts of radon, So depending on where you are, I had to do a lot of research because my parents didn't know. They thought it was mold, why she got the lung cancer. But that was the time I was actually studying the area, and that exact area, which it was next to all these sanitation, waste management sites. But that area, I read into the previous newspapers, and they said these factories, they're dumping all of these chemicals in the ground, and that's what causes a lot of the radon to rise up. But a lot of the industrial areas, you have to be very careful, and that's a lot in Pennsylvania. But even, as you look into areas of New Jersey, and so you have to be very mindful of even the environment, and that's why do not rush when you're doing these things. You had a comment or question? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, so don't move like the fly and move quick. Take your time like a worm. And, it definitely hurt. My family hurts me even to this day, simply because she had all of this excitement. I'm buying a house. I'm a homeowner. I'm the first homeowner, out of all my siblings. And it did not end well, So when you're now beginning the purchase, make sure you study. And this is why it's important, if possible, to have a real estate professional that's working with you. After you purchase your first property, you may not need a real estate professional, okay? Because there's a cost incurred for that. You'll always most times need an attorney, but you can purchase the property yourself without I'm telling you this as a real estate professional, right? But after you, with your first purchase, you won't know everything. So make sure you have the best people working beside you, okay? One comment, go ahead. Great question. So, you mentioned about having a property right next to the water. which is great, but you have to first, where does that water come from? Where does it originate from, right? Because look what happened in Texas, right? They were in a flood zone. That campsite was in a flood zone, and guess what happened? Boom, right? So, and again, Ellen White does mention that it should be elevated, or she did mention. So if there's a small brook, that's good. But you still don't want to have it close next to the property, because when you're entering the property, I'm not an inspector, but I've dealt with so many inspections I know, you go first down to the basement. You smell it. If it has that moldy smell, that means that there's a high amount of humidity. Sometimes you'll see a dehumidifier. That reveals it itself, right? That increases the chance of mold, which means that there's something nearby that's causing a lot of moisture, okay? That will impact the structure itself, right? Whatever has been used, stone or concrete, the stability of that structure. If you start seeing cracks, if you see cracks coming vertical, you typically don't have problems. If you see cracks horizontal, you usually have problems with the foundation, okay? Yeah, and sometimes you'll see the stair steps as well. But the size of it, that also will determine, how detrimental the home may become in the future. But also, you just look at the age of the property, right? That's another thing. If the home is built before 1978, you see the home. A lot of these homes are built before 1978, so they had lead paint being used, right? And so you can't do anything about that. But when they do the inspection, they'll let you know if the lead is going to cause a problem, especially if you have little kids, which can mess, them up, right? So you want to make sure that you look at the structure, and an inspector will do everything. But I always look at the structure, see if I see any major cracks, if I smell any mold. You can't really smell radon. You have to study the area and look at the reports in that area. Also the flood zone, look at that area as well. You can see that online. After I look at the structure, I go to the electrical panels, make sure all of the panels are working when you turn it on and off. There's no issues with the lights. The inspectors will typically have something to put in the outlet to make sure they're all working. But when you're looking at that electric panel, you want to make sure that there are no wires exposed or things like that that can cause a fire hazard. It's a fire hazard. And if that hasn't been resolved, that means that homeowner doesn't care. Because that whole entire house could burn down. Right now, there are a lot of things safety features that prevent that. But that's what I do when I go to the basement. When I'm on the first floor and the second floor, it's really hard to see, is this home worth it or not? But usually the basement is where everything starts. The basement and the roof, that just means you need to get a new roof. Most roofs, depending on the type of roof. Up here, a lot of the homes, they have metal roofs. Those are great, but they make a lot of noise when the rainfall comes. And if they don't have a gutter system, all that rain just, and that's what is causing a lot of individuals in this area, a lot of humidity, and that causes mold issues, right? So you want to make sure there's a good gutter system so that it's collecting the water. And there's a lot of individuals, what they'll do, they'll actually collect the water. You can't use it for drinking water, really, but you can use it to provide nutrients for your plants and animals. But those are the things I would have an inspector. They'll tell you the best. I hope that answered your question. Go ahead. Well, on a well, okay? But you have a well. A lot of homes, even though they're using the municipalities for water, they may have the septic system still. And you have to make sure you properly maintain that. You have the septic company come and clear that up. Don't use flushable wipes or things like that. But the well, yeah, the quality of the water, the inspector will tell you if it's good or bad. But typically most well water, which is free, it's usually good, okay? You'll have more issues with the water from the town. Go ahead, you're going to say. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Exactly, the insulation. So when you go to view the home, close all the windows and listen keenly if you could hear anything outside. That reveals the condition of the windows, if it's properly insulated, and also can you see clearly through it. There's, you can't see its blemish. That means that it needs to be changed. Average window each is five to $700 to install it, depending on the size of the window. So, when you're purchasing, if that's a problem, negotiate with the seller. I want a reduction because of the condition of these windows. Yeah, I just covered New York, right? So I only can help. Yeah, go ahead. Oh yes, yeah. I won't have anything I could do with the plumbing. Yeah, I would bring a plumber for that. But what even the inspectors don't mess with that. They all they'll do is they'll turn on the faucets, the shower to see if the pressure is good, especially if you have well, to make sure the pressure is strong enough. But the type of piping you have, that's in yes. Mm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
The
that's
roof replaced with, with PEX. Then I hear PEX is not the best thing, and
mhm.
but it was
Yeah.
almost a disaster.
If the temperature goes below 30%, that's what I do. Whenever at my home, whenever we're leaving, and we're away for 2 to 3 weeks, I make sure to turn on the water, let it drip a little, so that. But just make sure your heat is on. If you're gonna be away for that long, just keep your heat. Put the thermostat, set it at a certain, unless you have an advanced system, right? And go from there. Oh, okay. We'll start with the sister head. You go, Sean.
It's just a word of advice. If you buy a property and they say the well's there and all that, they will run like a little tube down to check it, but they're not checking it right because they told us your septic said, "Oh, it's good." Well, it started running off into the cornfield, killing the corn.
What?
Then we went to dig it up to have it emptied, and there was no septic there. They had put blocks around. It was a cistern. That was our started running off. Then we went to dig it up to put blocks. Make sure that they make sure it's there. It cost us over 3,000. And if you've got enough room for leach lines, we didn't have. We've had them put in, but if you don't have big enough property, all you get is a holding tank in your other tank, and it will overfill because we had that
Yep.
happen too.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another 4,000 for that. So let them check them septic
Home ownership is not
systems
cheap.
good. Oh yeah.
Go ahead, Sean.
I'm sorry that
Go ahead.
I'm sorry that happened to you. To the sister that was just speaking. That's actually part of the inspection process. You have to inspect there's companies that don't even clean septic tanks. They specialize in inspecting your septic system, and they're not just sending a camera down there. They're literally going down inside of your septic, and they're also using a camera.
Exactly.
But again, you want to see the integrity of that septic tank, and you can't buy a home without knowing that you have a functional septic system.
Yes.
That's a huge legal issue. I was gonna say, referring to your aunt, rest in peace. You said that she failed to check the conditions of the home in the right season, right?
Correct,
She should have checked it in winter. I would add to that, you want to make sure you check your attic and your roof when it's raining, because you're gonna see the moisture, and if it's not raining, you wouldn't really know it's there, because when we purchased our home, they told the inspector said, yeah, you got another 10 years with this roof. We knew the roof was on its way out, but 10 years and 10 months are two big different things, right? So they'll just throw a number out there with really no professional backing. Sometimes you have to actually inspect the inspector's work. Some of these people out there just trying to finish
That's
a job and get paid, but even bring another inspector over, and then also like understanding the medical machinery work, and the conventional way of healing, going to the doctor. We have to learn how to be our own doctors and learn this body, like inspiration says, the anatomy of our being. You have to learn how to learn the anatomy of your house. You're living there. That's a huge part of who you are. So we should learn all of these things as the inspectors come out and make sure that they're doing everything that we're paying them to do and that they're supposed to do.
Correct. Because of time, when I finish this, then we'll allow any point to be made. But I appreciate all the comments, especially what you said, Sean, in regard to that. So make sure you have the professionals there alongside you at every stage. It is definitely crucial when you're making this decision. So as we're coming to literally to the end, Genesis 2 verse 15, it says, the Lord God took the man, as we know who this was Adam, and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. I always say that your property should be a little Garden of Eden, right? And we know in inspiration it says that the Garden of Eden was supposed to be an example of heaven, right? So, it definitely is something you want to make sure that you have the ability to enhance your home. And that's why we are stewards. We're taking the raw materials and we're transforming into and returning it back to God even better, right? And he started that off with Adam. So when you acquire that property, it's very important. And just take time, go home, look at every single home. You can see who actually is a good steward of their home. Do they cut the grass? Basic things, right? It may be expensive to cut the grass. I don't know. Find a way, right? But it does impact when people are passing by, right? Clean out your windows, right? And it's not just externally, internally, right? Right? When Jesus left from his temporal home in the tomb, what did he do? Did he leave his outfit just in dismay? No, he folded it. After getting married, I cannot leave a crumb on the floor, right? I got to make sure the entire place, even when I left this morning, I was like, oh, I got to go. And I left the bed in the mess. I said, let me fix the pillows. Because if my wife sees that, she's like, what? So but sometimes you go to individuals' homes, like, what's going on, right? It should look good outside just as much as inside, right? But also important to maintain your home. So whatever the value of your home is, put aside at least 2% of that. So if it's $100,000, put aside $2,000 every year to cover the upkeep of that home, right? He mentioned about leaking, from the roof, right? Eventually, you're going to be hit with a bill, a new roof, $15,000, $20,000. If you've been putting aside money every single year, eventually you should be able to cover that. And other basic things. Don't delay getting it fixed. That's why putting aside a portion early on will prevent those issues from coming up, okay? But it says studies show that well-maintained homes can increase in value by up to 10 to 15% compared to homes with deferred maintenance, all right? So take care what God gives you. Proverbs 22 verse 7 says, the rich rules over the poor and the borrower is the slave to the lender. So you bought the home and you have a mortgage. You don't want to keep that mortgage even for 30 years. If you keep that mortgage for 30 years, whatever you bought that home for, you're going to pay 3 to 5 times that amount over the long haul. So if you bought it for $500,000, you'll end up paying $1.5 million because of the interest that they collect from that. So all I can say, and you can take a screenshot because of time, first off, if your mortgage, let's say, is $2,172. First thing is round it up to make it 2,200. Okay, simple increments will do a huge difference later. Will make a huge difference later on. But you have to make sure that you inform them, I want this to go specifically towards principal. Now, I'm not saying you just want to do an extra $20 every month. That's it. I typically say if you want to pay your home off in 5 years, you need to add 10% extra. If you want to pay your home off in 10 years, you need to add 20% extra. If you want to pay it off in half the time, you have to put 30% extra. So whatever your mortgage is, take 30% of that, and you need to add that on top of your monthly payment, okay? If you want to do it even in a quicker period of time, there's a gentleman that's, I forgot his name, Don Daniel. He's an Venice guy down in Oakwood, Alabama area, and he has a great strategy. Look him up, Don Daniel, and he has a way to pay off your home in 7 years. I won't discuss that right now because of time, but it's a simple thing what he does. you have to take out another loan. That's all you're doing, right? You take out a HELOC, and then that HELOC, let's say you get $40,000 or $50,000. When your next payment is due, you add that on top of your payment specifically towards the principal. And you want to do that especially at the beginning of when your payment is due, within when the statement is released. Okay, you add, because every day interest is accruing. Okay, so that's simply how he does in paying it off in 6 to 7 years. But it does work if your credit score is still high after you purchase that home and you have enough equity in the home. If you have no equity, you cannot do that. Okay. So we'll move on and we'll answer any questions at the end. Last one is Genesis 18, verse 2 to 5. I won't read this one per se, but we know the story when Jesus and the two other angels came and met Abraham and his wife. And did he say, oh, let's ignore them and let them move on and keep going their way? No. He opened up his home. He gave them food. He said, sit here, rest a while. And this is what our homes were truly meant for, even our churches, to be a place where individuals can come, rest, relax, be fed spiritually, physically, and be taken care of. So with your home, understand that it becomes a ministry over time. It starts off with you just having it as a place for your family, your kids to run back and forth, but eventually you start having Bible studies there. Eventually you start having worship services. Eventually you start using it as a place where, the neighbors on the block, you have a little block party, a Christian one, right? But there's small things that you can do that can make a huge impact and benefit the entire community and family gathering. So understand, your home has multiple purposes, and it definitely is a beautiful thing when owning a home, as long as you pay it off as soon as possible, unless you're able to purchase it outright. So with that, I will conclude. I will allow for just a few questions until my time is up, but here are a few QR codes. If you would like a free real estate ebook, you can just take your phone, just take an image of the whole thing. If you have more questions on actually purchasing a property, there's a QR code, so you could reach out to me if you want access to a few grants in your state. You can press that QR code. And again, if you want to speak with me and I can answer more of your questions, work with me, even if possible, you can also press that as well. Okay. Yes, I'll leave that up there. Yes, no problem. Okay. But I'll also have my cards here. Okay. So that's it. If you have any questions, you had any comments until he says, let's wrap it up, I'll let them be the ones to close it off. Whoever's the last person will have to pray. Okay, go ahead.
My friend, she purchased a house, and so her property tax just shot up in the same year twice. And so what they budgeted for in terms of a mortgage, it's far more now. So is there any way when you're moving to an area, if you can look at the history or to know what that will look like if in the future it will affect your property tax where you end up paying more?
Great question. Did she buy a new construction home?
It was remodeled.
Oh, there you go. So if you do any major work or if it's a new construction, they need to have a tax assessor come and actually see what it actually is worth in their eyes, which may be different than what it was before. So that changes the tax amount, and you can't typically do anything about that. So you have to, ask whoever's going to be doing that work, what is it going to look like in terms of my taxes when you do all of these capital improvements on the home. But there are a lot of, first understand, the reason behind property taxes is first for the county, whatever school, expenses that they have, or the town, they have any school expenses, and the other side goes to the police force. Especially if you live up here, you also have the sanitation and the snow removal. All of those taxes go towards that. So it's not a complete waste of money. If you're not contributing, you're not able to help boost that town's value over time. There has to be a way that everyone is paid in that town that is working to keep your road clean and clear. Okay, but there are also star exemptions that allow your tax to be lower. So I would recommend looking into that.
Sorry.
And also, sorry, you can also have back and actually see if they can get a reduction on your property taxes. Um, but
Right. Yeah, that's all I was asking for that. I want to take a picture.
sorry.
Thank you.
So, in relation to the property tax, so obviously the towns and everything have to be maintained, but principally we know that if you don't pay property tax, they can take possession of the home and so on and so forth.
Correct.
So, one, how can you possibly get out of that, and how is that legal?
So get out of that where you owe property taxes.
Is there a way, just as far as a question, and why is it a stipulation that if you don't pay property tax that they repossess?
To go from the latter, you have to pay to play. Okay.
Sure.
So, but again, it's not as if it's just going to the it's just going down the drain. As I said, if all of the students that go to public school, they're relying on the tax dollars to pay for that. When it comes to the police officers, the sanitation workers, the fire workers, all of those individuals, firefighters, they are being paid by those that are residing in that area. But every single month, typically, you'll have a town hall meeting. There are a lot of projects that are taking place in the area, which you're able to contribute and share your feedback on what needs to be done, which again is for the benefit of the community. So it's just adding a new park and doing those things, which has an impact on the taxes. But yeah, you can't evade property tax. I tell you that. You can't evade it at all, no matter what. But again, if you buy a modest home, after you've paid off that home, it's better than having a mortgage and tax. Okay? It's the same thing with homeowners insurance. Man, we have to pay this forever? No, you don't. That one you don't have to pay forever. But if you don't and something happens to your home, it's on you. Okay? But if you're in that situation, yeah. If you're in that situation behind in your tax, reach out to the town and ask them what options are available, okay, to be able to get back on your feet. But and also some individuals, they go out, like I mentioned, that lady, she went out and had an individual was willing to give her a loan to cover what she owed, okay? But out of all of the categories of debt, tax, they have the most power in terms of repossession of your property, okay? Second is mortgage, but that typically could take up to 7 to 10 years. Yeah. Here we got to end though.
The property tax. So I know that there certainly was a time where property tax was not a thing. So when did it become a thing, and when did it become essentially like legal tenure that if you don't pay this, that we're going to repossess your property?
That question I actually need to research myself.
Oh, okay.
I don't have the answer for that. I got to look back and see when did it actually begin and what was the reason behind it. But for the use of it now, clearly we see exactly what it's being allocated to. But everyone would love to have lower property taxes if possible. I would say that. And especially there are certain exemptions that individuals qualify, especially based off of their age. That definitely does help reduce. Yeah. Homestead exemptions and go.
Yeah, as far as the property taxes, it varies from state to state. Tennessee's taxes a little bit different. What you can do when they raise your taxes is to challenge it, right? And the way you challenge that is you look around and see similar properties around your house, what their tax height was or what it is, and if that range is great, you challenge them. You sue the city or the town, and so that, and I know individuals that have done that and came up on top. There's no way around the property tax. You know, it's there to entrap you. You know, yeah, it's there to entrap you. You're always gonna owe them. Yeah.
We had no here. They had a. I was born on tax day, but I'm not the tax man. So
Okay. You're not Zacchaeus.
yeah.
Is there a way to be able to pay like a couple years worth of tax? You know, because I'm thinking, how are we gonna navigate this, negotiate this, end times? You know, and just like pay it off, and just so you don't.
Well, your tax, what you owe in tax, changes year by year. So, and every year they're expecting the value of your home to increase. So your property tax is going to be going up in increments. So you typically can't look that far. When you purchase a home, they'll put in escrow, insurance, and property tax, and that amount you really can't do anything about that as well. But it's what we're stuck with. Okay. We'll end in 1 minute, by the way. Okay.
To be in the know as to what is happening in your area, because usually those things come up for votes to raise the property tax, yes or no. And so you do have a voice to speak up at the community level to say, no, I don't want my property taxes. And it blows my mind. I'm not saying get into politics, but if you get into an area, you have to know who your legislators are in that area and how to advocate for yourself. I know my taxes went up on another home that I have, and I was like, well, when did this happen? It went up and then it came back down. And so it is important to take part in what's happening in your community.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why individuals back then it was called mobile homes. Now it's called manufactured homes, but typically they're not completely connected to the ground, so it's not an actual full-on primary residence in itself, right? You can save a lot of money in the tax. Okay.
With the mobile homes, though, many banks or financial
They may not.
institutions do not want to
Correct.
finance it. So
Correct.
as you have been in real estate, you know the three things. In real estate, you know the three things. Location, location, location. So it does make a difference. And also, as we're speaking of all these things,
You'll pray to close out.
okay. Well, praise the Lord. Anyway, as we're talking about acquiring a country property, the counsel from God to us is that we need a small piece of land and a small property, and we ought to be within the vicinity of other like-minded people. I'm not saying move in with people. If that works, praise the Lord. But we need to look what God has told us to do, and the fact of the matter is this. As we intend to be on the right side of God in terms of under his blood-stained banner, we're not going to be able to pay taxes. We're going to have to leave. What did he tell us? We are now in these small areas preparing to go to mountainous areas. And I know a lot of Adventists like to say, well, that's why we camp out so that we are used to it. And I'm going, how do you know you'll have an opportunity to get a tent? You may be out or whatever it is. You understand what I'm saying? And we don't have any idea. That's why we can't. How do you may trust in the Lord, because we all thinking we're going to be able to get in the car and go wherever it is. No, you don't know what God has planned. I'm going to end here and thank the Lord that He has it all in His hands. And let us stop presupposing how it's going to go. It's good to have a plan, like we'll meet up at A's house and more hands make the work light. But at the same time, what if you can't get there? So we just have to be prayerful. I'm praying, bowing our heads, closing our eyes. Our Father who art in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity to come together as your people, this camp meeting. We pray that the Holy Spirit will continue to abide with us and that we may look to him, because Jesus said it was expedient for him to go, that the Holy Spirit would come to lead us into all truth. And he will enlighten our minds, because we're going to have to put down cell phones. That's got to stay on the table or wherever you are. Leave it on the bench. But nevertheless, teach us to realize that you have a plan for us and you will make it possible. You expanded that oil so she never ran out while your servant was there. You can do it for the car and keep it going forward. Whatever it is that you have for us, just help us to be wholly trusted in you. And what fears we have, let us tell you and ask you to relieve us of it and trust that you have promised that you will provide and you cannot lie. And we thank you. Bless the brother who presented. Bless everyone here on the grounds that are here learning, and those that don't even know. They may hear something and come by. They may not sit down, but they might get a little closer